I slid into my husband's car, fingers grazing the cold handle of the door. Inside the glove compartment, I noticed a tube of personal lubricant carelessly left behind. My heart clenched as a familiar chill spread across my body. Without a word, I swapped it out. I replaced it with a tube of industrial-strength superglue silent. Unseen and perfectly executed, the next thing I knew, our neighbors were dialing 911, their voices filled with urgency. As they watched in disbelief, here's where my story begins. Where everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, the trust I had built came crashing down. If you're watching this, I ask that you subscribe to my channel and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm curious how far this tale of revenge has spread. Now, let's dive into this twisted journey. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the stillness of the house heavy in the air. The only sound was the relentless ticking of the old clock, a gift from my late mother. Each tick felt like a judgment, each second dragging me deeper into a web I never wanted to see. Julian, my husband, walked in like a man burdened with a secret. He wasn't just exhausted, he was haunted. His face, once the image of calm confidence, now bore the marks of guilt, a weight too heavy for him to carry alone. He tossed his jacket on the couch with a deliberate heaviness, unbuttoned his shirt as if it were choking him, and collapsed into bed without a word. The springs groaning beneath him. As I watched him, I noticed something strange. The scent of his cologne lingered in the room, but it mingled with an unfamiliar fragrance, a sweet, floral perfume that didn't belong. Minutes later, his snoring filled the house. Once a comforting sound, but now a mocking lullaby. I moved quietly through the house, collecting the scattered remnants of his evening, his jacket, his wallet, his phone, and his laptop. As I picked up his phone, I noticed the screen was on, an email waiting to be opened. It wasn't like him. Julian always complained about technology. He hated emails, preferring the simplicity of phone calls. So why was there one now, left wide open, just sitting there in plain sight? I shouldn't have looked, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the message, my heart hammering in my chest. It was brief, only a few words, but those words shattered everything I thought I knew. You were amazing tonight, Dad. The word Dad reverberated in my mind, like a slap across the face. Who was calling him that? And why in such a tender, intimate way? The email address was an enigma, a jumble of characters that led nowhere. I was frozen, the cold fear creeping into my bones. There was a secret, a door I didn't know existed, cracking open before me. I glanced at Julian, still peacefully asleep, and wondered how long he had been living this hidden life. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to act. I returned the phone to its place and carried on with the mundane task of cleaning up the mess he had left behind. But my mind was racing, drowning in a sea of suspicion. As I gathered his clothes to take to the laundry, I found a receipt in his pants pocket. It was from a high-end steakhouse in San Antonio, dated for the same night he claimed to be in Dallas. My heart sank. Julian hated the drive to Dallas, but San Antonio was different. It held memories of his late mother. He'd mentioned it countless times before, but who had he been dining with there? And why had he lied to me? I snapped a picture of the receipt and the strange email. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was something darker, something real. I had to get to the bottom of this. I slipped outside into the garage, Julian's SUV still warm, the faint trace of his cologne and the floral perfume still lingering. As I opened the door, my stomach tightened. My flashlight flickered in the dim light as I scoured every corner of the car. Nothing seemed out of place except for one thing. In the glove compartment, beneath the usual clutter, was a tube of used personal lubricant. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even Julian's. We hadn't been intimate in years. He always said he was too tired. But this was undeniable. My world tilted. I carefully returned the item to its place, wiping my hands on a napkin, as if trying to scrub the betrayal off my skin. But there was no denying it now, something was terribly wrong. The silence in the house felt different the next morning, heavier. It was as though the very air had changed, thick with the weight of secrets yet to be uncovered. Julian, of course, was already up, his eyes still heavy with sleep, his every movement rehearsed. It was the same routine, the same performance of a life I thought we shared. But now I was beginning to see the cracks. I tried to act normal, tried to carry on with the motions of breakfast, the ordinary gestures that had always anchored us. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, and I prepared to scrambled eggs, the way Julian liked them, light, fluffy, almost buttery. He sat at the table, his eyes slightly glazed, as if he hadn't slept at all. "I've got a meeting today, Juliet," he said, his voice gruff from sleep. "Don't wait up for me. You know how these things go." He gave me the same casual smile he'd used 1,000 times before. But it didn't reach his eyes. I nodded, forcing a smile. All the while feeling like a stranger in my own home, I thought back to the night before, what I'd found in the glove compartment, the email, the receipt. What was going on? My mind raced through every possible scenario, but no matter how hard I tried, the pieces didn't fit together. It didn't make sense. As Julian left for his important meeting, I went about the day in a haze. I told myself I wouldn't overreact, that I would wait for the facts, for the undeniable proof. But something inside me already knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something had shifted, and I was no longer the wife in a happy marriage. I was the wife in a war, whether I wanted to be or not. Later that afternoon, I found myself pacing through the house, my thoughts spiraling. I stopped at the kitchen window and stared out, trying to focus on the ordinary sights, the flowers in the garden, the birds flitting by, the peaceful street outside. But the tranquility felt like a lie, a false calm before the storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that Julian was hiding something big. His phone, the emails, the receipt, everything pointed to a truth I was too afraid to face. It was then that I decided to do something I never thought I'd have to do. I called Mrs. Miller, a friend from the early days of the bakery. She'd helped me through a lot, and I knew she had a contact, Thomas, a private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases. I never imagined I'd need him, but now I didn't know where else to turn. "Juliet, what's going on?" Mrs. Miller's voice was filled with concern when I called her. "Is everything okay?" "No, it's not," I replied, my voice trembling. "I need to know the truth. Can you give me Thomas's number?" There was a long pause on the line before she answered. "I'll send it over right away. Don't do anything rash, okay?" I didn't answer, but her words stayed with me. Was I being rash? Should I trust Julian? Or had the truth been hiding in plain sight all along? Within the hour, I received a message from Thomas. He'd agreed to meet me at a small cafe downtown. I didn't hesitate for a second. The truth was within my grasp, and nothing was going to stop me from finding it. The cafe was small, tucked away between two towering buildings. The kind of place where the noise of the city faded into a soft hum, and the world outside felt distant. I walked in, the scent of freshly brewed coffee greeting me like an old friend. I found a quiet corner where I could keep my back to the wall. A few minutes later, Thomas arrived. He was a man in his late 40s, with a calm demeanor that radiated authority. Dressed in a simple blue shirt and khaki pants, he exuded a professional air that immediately put me at ease. His eyes, however, were the ones that stood out, sharp, observant, as if he saw right through me. "You must be Juliet," he said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of years spent unraveling secrets. I nodded, feeling the tension in my shoulders. I'd been carrying this weight alone for far too long. It was time to let someone else bear it. "I need your help," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think my husband is hiding something. I need to know what he's been doing when he's not with me." Thomas didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, with a calm nod, he opened his notebook and wrote something down. "I'll start by following him this afternoon," he said, his voice steady. "Don't worry, I'll keep you updated. You won't be left in the dark for long." I handed him the photos I'd taken their mail, the receipt, the pictures of the lubricant, and the napkins I found in Julian's car. Thomas examined each item closely, nodding as if everything was falling into place. "I'll start immediately," he said, standing up. "You've done well by gathering this evidence. Now let me do the rest." I watched him leave, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. There was no turning back now. I had crossed the line into unknown territory, and I had no idea where this would take me. The next few days were a blur of mundane routine and quiet anxiety. I kept my eyes open for any sign that Julian was hiding something more, but everything seemed to return to normal, at least on the surface. He continued to leave for his meetings, always with the same rehearsed smile, the same excuses. But I was no longer fooled. Then, one evening, the phone rang. "It was Thomas. I've got the information you asked for," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I've been following Julian, and what I found. Well, you need to sit down for this." My heart skipped a beat. I knew this was at the moment everything would change. I told myself to stay calm, but inside, I was bracing for impact. "Julian has been seeing someone," Thomas continued. "A woman. And I've got the photos to prove it." My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. The man I had spent 40 years with, the man I trusted, was living a lie. The following days blurred into each other. I went through the motions serving customers at the bakery, going over deliveries, managing the kitchen, but my mind was a storm of thoughts. I tried to focus, to keep everything in check, but Julian's absence weighed heavily on me. He was so casual about his business trips, leaving me each morning with that same tired smile, the same rehearsed kiss goodbye. But I could feel it now. In my gut there was something wrong. The bakery was bustling as usual on Thursday morning, the bell above the door jingling with each customer that entered. I moved through the motions of baking and greeting clients, but inside, my nerves were on edge. Every time the phone rang, my heart skipped. What if it was Thomas? What if he had found something new? I couldn't afford to lose control, but I was becoming more and more obsessed with the truth. It was around 2 p.m. when the phone rang. It was Thomas. I froze, my hands instinctively wiping on the apron, feeling a sudden cold sweat break out across my back. My heart pounded in my chest. "Juliet," Thomas's voice came through, calm but with an edge of urgency. "I've got the photos you requested. And more." I felt a knot tighten in my throat. "What have you found?" "There's more to this than I thought," Thomas said, his tone careful. "I've been following Julian for the last few days, and it's clear there's something going on. You need to see the evidence. It's not just dinner meetings." I closed my eyes for a second, trying to keep calm. "What kind of evidence?" "I've got photos," he continued, "of Julian and a woman. They were in a hotel together last night. They stayed there overnight. I have the pictures to prove it." I felt my stomach drop. The room spun for a moment, and I had to steady myself against the counter. I forced out a breath. "Is it her?" Thomas paused. "Yes, it's her. The woman from the emails. The one who called him Dad." I swallowed hard. I knew it. I knew something was off. "You're right," Thomas said. "You weren't imagining things. But don't jump to conclusions just yet. I've also got video footage from earlier today. They were spotted leaving the hotel together. They were laughing, sharing a private moment that didn't look like business." My breath caught. I don't know what to say, Juliet. I've got everything documented. I'll send you the files. You have to be ready for what's coming next." "This isn't over." I gripped the phone tighter, the silence between us now filled with unspoken understanding. I wanted to scream, to confront Julian right then and there, but something told me to hold back. This wasn't the right time. "Not yet, I'll meet you later," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to see everything." When I hung up the phone, I could barely breathe. My mind raced, the realization crashing over me like a tidal wave. Julian, the man I had been married to for decades, had been lying to me, betraying me with someone I had trusted. Someone close to my heart. All the signs had been there, hadn't they? The long nights away, the strange emails, the perfume. I had ignored it all, hoping it was nothing more than my imagination running wild. But it wasn't, it was real. Julian had been living a life I never knew about. A life that had excluded me. The bakery had become a blur. My hands moved mechanically, preparing pastries and filling orders, but my mind was elsewhere. My thoughts were consumed with the image of Julian and her together. How long had this been going on? Was I the fool, blind to the truth for years? I didn't even notice the time slipping away until my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Thomas. The photos and videos had arrived. I opened the file, my heart pounding with dread, and began to scroll through the images. The first photo was of Julian standing outside a hotel. His face was unmistakable, the same man I had spent my life with, but now he seemed like a stranger. His arm was draped around the woman's shoulders, her face partially obscured by dark sunglasses. The photo was taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the intimacy in their posture. I clicked to the next photo. This one was taken inside the hotel lobby. Julian and the woman were sitting across from each other, their heads leaned in close, whispering. There was a shared familiarity in their gestures that made my stomach turn. I moved through the photos, each one worse than the last. There they were, at dinner, laughing and sharing a bottle of wine, his arm casually draped over her chair, her hand resting on his thigh. Another photo showed them leaving the hotel in the early morning hours. Their faces flushed, and their expressions relaxed, as if they had just returned from a lover's retreat. The final photo was the one that broke me. It was a simple image, but it was enough. Julian and the woman were standing at the entrance to the hotel, his hand tightly clasping hers as they prepared to leave. There was a brief moment of eye contact between them, and Julian smiled smirked a look of pure satisfaction. It was a look I had never seen directed at me in years. And that smile, that damn smile, was all I needed to see. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I couldn't cry. Not yet. I had to stay strong. For myself. For the truth. The message from Thomas popped up next. I'll be in touch tomorrow. I'll continue to follow them. But I think you have enough now to decide what you want to do next. I stared at the screen, my heart heavy with sorrow. The truth was staring me in the face, undeniable. Julian had been living a secret life, and it wasn't just with her. He had lied to me, to my face, and betrayed everything we had built together. I didn't know what to do. The shock was overwhelming, but beneath it, there was something else rising, something darker. Anger, rage, a need for justice. I couldn't let him get away with this. I had spent my entire life building a family, a business, a legacy. And now it was all falling apart because of his lies. But I wouldn't let him take everything from me. Not without a fight. The night was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that fills the air with anticipation, as though the universe is holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos Thomas had sent me. They felt like they were burning a hole in my soul, each image a knife twisting deeper into my heart. Julian's betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a cold, hard truth. And with that truth came the flood of emotions I'd been pushing down for weeks: anger, sadness, confusion. But most of all, betrayal. I didn't know what to do with all of it. How could Julian, the man I had stood by for 40 years, the man I had raised children with, built a life with, be capable of this? And why now? Why with her? I couldn't sit still anymore. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. My hands were trembling, my body on edge, as though I could feel the storm coming. Every muscle in my body screamed for action. I had to confront him. It wasn't just about the pictures or the lies anymore. It was about my dignity. I took a deep breath and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the dark driveway outside. Julian's SUV was parked there, as it always was. But tonight, it looked different. Tonight, it looked like a prison, the very thing that had once felt like home. I checked the time. It was almost midnight. He wasn't back yet. The rage inside me simmered, but I knew I had to wait. If I confronted him now, the words wouldn't come out the way I wanted. He would lie, deny, and charm his way out of it. I had to be smart. I went to the garage, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. Should I wait for him to come back? Should I confront him as soon as he walked through the door? The thought of him walking back in like nothing was wrong made my blood boil. The nerve of him, but I needed something more. I needed him to see the destruction he had caused. He needed to understand that he wasn't going to get away with this. Not this time. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I typed out a message to Thomas. I'm going to confront him. Can you meet me at the house? I need you to be there when it all goes down. The response came almost immediately. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The urgency in his reply gave me a brief moment of relief. At least I wouldn't have to do this alone. The door creaked open, and my heart skipped. I turned quickly, my eyes landing on Julian as he stepped into the living room, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot. He had clearly been out drinking, but there was something else about him tonight. A certain unease, a sense that he knew something was coming, but couldn't figure out what. Juliet, he said, his voice flat. You're still up. It's late. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, my hands clenched at my sides, my stomach turning in disgust. I was done with pretending. Done with holding it together for his sake. I've been looking at something, I said finally, my voice calm but full of an emotion I couldn't name. Something that's made me realize how much you've lied to me. For a long time, his face tightened. He knew, but he was still going to try to lie his way out of it. What are you talking about? He let out a nervous laugh, his eyes shifting as if looking for an escape route. Juliet, you're overreacting again. This is ridiculous. I pulled out my phone, swiping through the pictures. His eyes widened as he saw the images of him with her. Each one, a strike against everything he had ever promised me. Don't try to deny it, I said, my voice cold. I've seen the photos, Julian. I've seen the receipts. The hotel. The emails. You think I'm a fool? His face went pale, the color draining from it as though he had seen a ghost. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost, you don't understand, he stammered, his voice shaky now. It's not what you think. She's just a friend. We've been working together on a project. I interrupted him with a sharp laugh, bitter and mocking. A project? Is that what you're calling it now? Julian's eyes flickered with fear, and for the first time in a long while, I saw him for what he truly was, a man caught in his own lies. With nowhere to run, Juliet, please, he said, his voice more pleading than I had ever heard it. I didn't mean for it to happen. You have to understand. No, I snapped, my voice louder now, stronger. I don't have to understand, Julian. You've betrayed me. You've betrayed this family, and I'm done being the one who makes excuses for your behavior. I don't care about your explanations anymore. I took a step toward him, my eyes never leaving his. You made your choices, and now it's time for me to make mine. He opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could get a word out, the doorbell rang. I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or angry. Relieved that Thomas had arrived to witness the confrontation, but angry that Julian would have one more chance to weasel his way out of this. I motioned for Julian to sit down as I walked to the door. When I opened it, Thomas stepped in, his presence solid and unyielding. His eyes briefly met mine, and I could tell he understood the gravity of the situation. He gave me a subtle nod of support before turning his attention to Julian. Julian, Thomas said, his tone direct but professional. We need to talk. Julian froze, his eyes darting between us, realizing for the first time that he was truly cornered. I don't know what's going on here, Julian said, his voice cracking. This is insane. You're both just, you know what's going on, I interrupted, stepping forward. You've been caught. Now, it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. I didn't look away as I spoke. I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I felt the strength I had been hiding from myself. Julian's face twisted with frustration, his eyes narrowing. You can't do this. You're making a huge mistake. I'm not making a mistake, I said firmly. You've made it for me. I'm done, Julian. I'm done with the lies, the secrets, and the betrayal. You're not going to hurt me anymore. The tension in the room was palpable. Julian looked like a man who knew his entire world was collapsing around him, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. Thomas stepped forward, holding out a small envelope. I think these will explain everything, Julian. Everything you've been hiding from Juliet. Julian took the envelope, his hands trembling. He pulled out the contents and quickly scanned the papers inside. His face grew paler with each passing second, his eyes flickering between me and Thomas. I don't. He stammered, but the words died in his throat. I wasn't surprised. His game was up. You made your bed, Julian, I said quietly, my voice steady, resolute. Now lie in it. The room seemed to shrink with each passing second. Julian was no longer the man I thought I knew. The confident, charming husband had disappeared, replaced by a desperate, guilty shell of a man, his pride and lies stripped away. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, and the silence that followed his scanning of the envelope felt like a 1,000-pound boulder pressing down on his chest. He finally dropped the papers on the table, his face twisted in disbelief, his eyes not meeting mine. I didn't think you would ever find out, he muttered, almost to himself, as if the words were meant for someone else. I didn't think it would go this far. The audacity of his statement hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't even apologizing. He wasn't taking responsibility for his actions. He was still trying to frame this as my fault, my discovery, my reaction, my breaking point. It was as if all the years we spent together had meant nothing, reduced to a game he was playing to get what he wanted. You didn't think I'd find out? I echoed, my voice dangerously calm, a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing inside me. You didn't think I'd find out that you were sleeping with my daughter-in-law, and you thought you could get away with it. How dare you? His eyes flickered with a mix of shame and defiance. It wasn't like that. You don't understand, Juliet. No, I cut him off, my voice sharp now, the anger rising in my chest. I understand perfectly well, Julian. You think I'm stupid. You think I'm blind, and that you can do whatever you want without consequences. But I'm not blind. I see everything now, and I'm not letting you worm your way out of this. You don't get to betray me and expect a happily ever after. The room was thick with the weight of my words, the truth hanging between us like a heavy curtain. I could feel the presence of Thomas behind me, his quiet support grounding me. But it was Julian's reaction that intrigued me most. He swallowed hard, his throat constricting as though he were choking on his own lies. It wasn't supposed to be this way, he murmured. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It just did. I didn't want to hurt you, Juliet. But I did. He looked up at me then, his gaze filled with a mix of regret and frustration. I've made mistakes, but this doesn't have to end like this. We can fix this, can't we? We can try again. Please just give me a chance to explain. The word echoed in my mind like a sick joke. The nerve to explain? I repeated, my voice steady, but the fire burning in my chest threatened to consume me. How do you explain this? How do you explain her? How do you explain the lies, the secrets, the betrayal of everything I thought we had? You've destroyed us, Julian. This isn't just a mistake. This is who you've become. I took a step closer to him, my eyes never leaving his. You've been living a double life, and you think I'll just forgive you because you say you're sorry? Because you didn't mean for it to happen? He didn't respond right away, his eyes dropping to the table as if the weight of my words had finally started to sink in. Juliet, his voice faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability, real fear, not the fake remorse he'd been playing for so long. I don't want to lose you. I'm already lost, I replied, my voice like ice. You lost me the moment you chose her over me. And there's no going back from this. The silence that followed felt suffocating, as though the air had turned to lead. For so long, I had lived in a lie, wrapped in the comfortable belief that Julian was the man he had once promised to be. But now that lie was exposed, and there was no putting it back together. I had seen the cracks, and there was no way to unsee them. I turned away from him, my back straight, my hands trembling as I reached for the door. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I needed to get away. I needed to breathe. But before I could leave the room, Thomas spoke up. Julian, you need to understand, Thomas said, his voice low but authoritative. What you've done here, it's not just about the affair. It's about the trust you've shattered. It's about the life you've built on lies, and you can't expect to walk away unscathed. Julian's face twisted in confusion and anger. What are you talking about? This is my life too. No, Thomas interjected, stepping forward with a calmness that was almost unsettling. Your life isn't just yours. You had a family, a partner, a business. Your actions affect more than just your own little bubble. And now you've put yourself in a position where it's too late to fix this. Julian looked between us, his face pale, his mind clearly racing for any way out. I didn't mean for this to happen, he repeated, his voice shaky. I love you, Juliet. I do, but things changed. We changed. And I made a mistake. I turned toward him one last time, my heart heavy with the realization that this was it. The man I had spent 40 years of my life with was no longer the man I thought I knew. He was someone else entirely, someone I no longer recognized. You don't love me, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. If you did, you wouldn't have betrayed me like this. You wouldn't have turned our lives into a game. Julian opened his mouth to say something, but I couldn't hear it. I couldn't bear it anymore. I turned and walked out of the room, my steps resolute. I wasn't sure what would happen next, whether he would try to fight for me, whether he would beg, or whether he would walk away and pretend nothing had happened. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let him break me. I needed time. Time to process, to heal, to figure out what came next. But I knew one thing, I was done being his victim. I was done being the fool. The days that followed were a blur. The house felt foreign to me, each room a reminder of the life I had once known, now shattered. Julian's presence lingered in the halls, but he was a ghost now. The man I had built a life with, the father of my children, the partner I had loved for so long, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man who had made choices I could never forgive. And yet, despite everything, there was a strange peace that settled over me. It wasn't relief, exactly, not yet. But there was a certain clarity, a quiet strength in knowing that I had faced the truth head on. Even when it had hurt more than I ever imagined, I kept the bakery running. As I always had, but there was a weight in my chest, a heaviness that wouldn't go away. Every time I thought of Julian, of his betrayal, of the way he had destroyed everything we built together, the anger bubbled up inside me, threatening to overwhelm me. But I wouldn't let it. I wouldn't let him have that power over me anymore. I had learned something through all of this, that no matter what, I would survive. I would thrive. And I would rebuild. Not for him. Not for anyone else. But for me. The days after the confrontation felt like a blur, a strange mix of clarity and chaos. My body moved through the motions of life baking, serving customers, managing the bills, but my mind was elsewhere, wrestling with the storm of emotions that raged inside me. The bakery, once a place of comfort and warmth, felt like a battleground now. Each tray of pastries I set on the counter, each invoice I signed, carried with it the weight of betrayal. I had always thought I was a strong woman. But this was a different kind of strength. The kind that wasn't about keeping it together for everyone else. The kind that was about surviving the worst. Holding on to whatever shred of dignity and peace remained when everything you thought you knew had been shattered. Julian had tried to reach me several times after the confrontation. I'd ignored his calls, his texts. I couldn't bring myself to hear his voice again. Every word he had spoken during our last conversation felt like a hollow lie, a rehearsed plea for forgiveness that held no meaning anymore. But I knew that sooner or later, we would have to talk again. There was no escaping the truth. It was on the third day after the confrontation that I saw him again. He showed up at the bakery unannounced, his face drawn, tired. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped as though he carried the weight of the world. The bell above the door jingled, and I turned around to see him standing there like a ghost from my past. For a moment, I thought I might crumble under the pressure of his presence. But instead, I took a deep breath and held my ground. "Juliet," he said softly, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk." I couldn't look away from him, though every part of me wanted to turn and run. His presence filled the room, his scent once so familiar now foreign and unwelcome. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still, as though I was caught between two realities. "I don't want to talk to you," I replied, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "There's nothing left to say, please," he said, stepping closer, his hands held out in a gesture of surrender. "Just hear me out. Let me explain." I didn't move, my eyes narrowing as I took in the broken man standing before me. The man who had once been my rock was now reduced to this begging for a chance, for a second chance. "There's nothing to explain, Julian," I said firmly. "You've already explained everything with your actions. You've shown me who you really are, and I don't need any more explanations. I've seen enough." His face faltered, his lips trembling as though he were trying to find the words to bridge the distance between us. "I know I've hurt you. I've betrayed you in ways I can't take back. But I love you, Juliet. I've always loved you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment I wondered if there was a part of me that still wanted to believe him. But the truth was clear now. Love wasn't enough. Love didn't give him the right to destroy everything we had built. "I don't need your love, Julian," I said, my voice unwavering. "I need the truth. And I have that now. The truth is, you chose her. You've been living a lie. And I'm not going to pretend anymore that this is something I can fix." Julian took a step back, his eyes welling with emotion. But I didn't flinch. I stood there strong and resolute, even though my insides were torn to pieces. "This is the end, Julian," I said quietly, the weight of my words sinking in. "This isn't something that can be undone. I'm not going to be your second choice. I'm not going to keep living in your shadow, pretending that everything is okay when it's not." I turned away from him then, unable to look at his broken face any longer. I didn't have the energy to keep fighting for something that was never mine to begin with. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the weight of what had happened grew a little lighter. I kept the bakery running, pouring my heart into each batch of pastries, each loaf of bread, each order. There was a strange comfort in the familiar rhythm of it all. It wasn't just about the business. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken from me, my sense of self. It wasn't easy, though. There were moments when I wanted to scream, when the thought of Julian and their betrayal gnawed at me like an open wound. But with each sunrise, I felt a little stronger, a little more like myself again. I spent more time with Mrs. Peterson, walking through the park, talking about everything and nothing. Her support, though unspoken, had become a lifeline for me. It was during one of our walks that she asked the question I had been avoiding. "How are you really doing, Juliet?" I stopped walking, looking out at the row of trees lining the path, the leaves just beginning to turn orange in the fall. It felt like the entire world was in a state of transition just like me. "I'm better," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "I'm not okay. But I will be," she smiled kindly, her eyes filled with a knowing warmth. "You've always been strong, Juliet. I've seen you fight for this bakery, for your family. This is just another battle you'll win." Her words brought me some peace, but they also reminded me of what I had lost. One evening, a few weeks after Julian's last visit, I received a text from him. He had sent me the divorce papers. It was the final act of closure, though I didn't expect it to be this difficult. I sat on the couch, holding the papers in my hands, staring at the signature line where my name was supposed to go. It felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't wake up from, but it wasn't a dream. It was real. And it was time to move on. I signed the papers without hesitation. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness anymore. It was about freedom. Freedom from the man who had once been my everything, and freedom from the life I had been forced to live. The next morning, I walked into the bakery, the same sense of purpose in my step. The door opened with its familiar chime, and the scent of fresh bread and pastries filled the air. As I took my place behind the counter, I realized something profound. I was finally free. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Months passed, and life slowly returned to its new normal. The bakery flourished, the customers returned, and I found joy in the small, simple things that had once seemed so insignificant. I took pride in the work I did, in the family I had rebuilt around me. And while the pain of the past never completely disappeared, it became a part of my story, not something that defined me, but something that had taught me how to stand on my own. Daniel, my son, was a constant source of support. Though he had been hurt by the truth of Julian's betrayal, he and I had become closer. We worked side by side in the bakery, laughing at silly things, sharing stories, and occasionally finding time to sit down and have a quiet meal together. There were still moments when I thought of Julian, of the life we once had. But those thoughts didn't control me anymore. I had found peace in letting go. One day, as I stood in the bakery, watching the sun set over the street, Mrs. Peterson came in with a big smile. "Juliet, I have to tell you something." "What is it?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. "You're not just the bakery lady anymore," she said, her eyes sparkling. "You've become an inspiration to this entire town. Everyone's talking about how strong you've been through all of this." I smiled, feeling a warmth fill my chest. "I'm just doing what I have to do." She patted me on the shoulder. "No, you're doing more than that. You're showing us all what it means to pick up the pieces, no matter how hard it is." And in that moment, I realized she was right. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, even when life threw the worst at you. It was about finding the strength to rebuild, no matter how broken you felt. As the door swung open again, I smiled at the familiar face walking in. Life, like the seasons, kept moving forward, and I was ready for whatever came next. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I finally felt the weight of everything that had happened slipping off my shoulders. The bakery was bustling, as always, with the familiar clink of the register and the soft murmur of customers chatting. But today, for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. The day was beautiful. The sky a perfect shade of blue, and the sun filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. I stood behind the counter, arranging pastries just as I had done for years, but something about today felt different. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could smile freely. Without the weight of betrayal and heartbreak dragging me down, Daniel was sitting at the cash register, organizing the invoices with his usual methodical care. The scent of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls filled the air, comforting, warm, familiar. But more than that, it was mine. Everything in this place was mine, built from the ground up by my own hands, with my own sweat and my own heart. And I was finally beginning to understand what that truly meant. It had been almost 6 months since Julian left. 6 months since the truth about him and Alison had ripped through my world. But with every passing day, I had found new strength. Not just in the bakery, but in myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to define me. I wasn't looking for validation from the man I thought would always be there. Julian had taken so much from me, but in the end, he had given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to rediscover who I was. I glanced over at Daniel, who was busy with the phone, taking another order from a local restaurant. My heart swelled with pride. The boy I had raised was becoming a man strong, kind, and supportive. He had been through his own pain, and though we never spoke much about it, I could see the subtle changes in him. The way he smiled more now, the way he no longer seemed weighed down by the darkness of our family's past. "Mom," he said suddenly, looking up from the register. "The Grand Hotel called again. They want to increase their order for next week's banquet. We're getting busy." I couldn't help but smile. "That's great news. We'll need to bake extra, and I'll need you to stay late with me to finish it all." He smiled back at me, a knowing look in his eyes. "You know I'm always here, right? Whatever you need." The simple, quiet support from my son meant everything to me. After all that had happened, after the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the loneliness, I had come to understand that love doesn't just come from romantic relationships. Sometimes it comes from the people who stand beside you through the storm, people like Daniel, people like Mrs. Peterson, and even the community that had rallied around me when they learned what had happened. I took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of fresh dough rising in the back. There was something beautiful in the way the dough needed time to rise, just like I had needed time to heal. I had been kneaded, shaped, and stretched, but in the end, I had risen. And just like the loaves in the oven, I was stronger now, solid in a way I had never been before. It wasn't easy. It wasn't painless. But nothing worth having ever is. I moved toward the back of the bakery, preparing the next batch of dough, when the bell above the door jingled again. A customer, probably another regular, came in. But when I looked up, I froze. It was him. Julian. He stood in the doorway, looking just as I remembered him, tall, confident, his dark hair still in that perfect wave. But there was something different about him now, something broken in his eyes. He hadn't changed physically, but emotionally, he was a shadow of the man I once knew. I felt a pang of sorrow, but it wasn't for him. Not anymore. The pain of his betrayal had faded, replaced by something I hadn't expected: relief. It wasn't the kind of relief that comes from forgiveness. No, it was the kind of relief that comes when you finally close a chapter in your life and realize you no longer need it to define you. For a moment, we just stood there, two strangers in the same room, bound by shared history but separated by the truth. The silence between us was thick, suffocating, but I refused to be the one to break it. He took a tentative step forward, his hands slightly trembling. "Juliet, I don't expect you to forgive me," he started, his voice weak. "But I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies, the hurt. I know it's too late, but I need you to know that I regret every moment of it." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was at peace. I had come to terms with the fact that this man, this stranger, was no longer the person I had once loved. The man who stood before me was broken, regretful, but he was still the man who had made choices that had cost us everything. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice strong but not bitter. "It is too late. And you're right about one other thing, Julian. I can't forgive you, not right now. But what I can do is thank you for showing me the strength I had inside me all along." His eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't name. Was it guilt? Was it sadness? Maybe it was both. "I don't deserve your strength," he whispered, as if acknowledging the truth of what had happened between us. "No," I replied, standing tall. "You don't, but I deserve my own peace, and I'm not going to let you take that from me anymore." For a long moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that comes when two people understand they are no longer a part of each other's future. Julian turned slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked out of the bakery without another word. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, my chest tight. But then, just as quickly, I felt the weight lift. It was done, over. And as I returned to the counter, to the work that I loved, I realized something profound. Letting go wasn't just about moving past the hurt. It was about reclaiming myself. Reclaiming my life. That evening, as the sun set and the final customers trickled out of the bakery, I sat in my small office in the back, watching the street outside. The soft glow of the street lights flickered on, casting a golden hue on everything, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight of everything: the pain, the loss, the betrayal finally begin to dissolve. The future was no longer a place of uncertainty. It wasn't something I had to wait for or dread. It was something I was ready to face head-on. I had built this life from the ground up. The bakery, my family, my dignity, all of it was mine. And I was ready for whatever came next. As I finished my paperwork for the day, I received a call from Daniel. He was out with some of his firefighter friends, celebrating the completion of a big project at the station. "Mom," he said with a chuckle, "I just wanted to tell you that the Grand Hotel is asking for even more orders for next month. We're officially booked for the holidays. You've got to start planning." I couldn't help but laugh. It felt good to hear his voice, to hear him excited about the future. "I'll get the dough ready," I said, the warmth in my voice genuine. "Good, I'll be home later to help out with whatever you need." As I hung up the phone, I felt a quiet smile spread across my face. No matter what had happened, I still had my son. I still had the bakery. And most importantly, I had myself. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But I was done being afraid of the future. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was stepping into it, ready for whatever it brought. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. A few weeks passed, and as the holidays approached, the bakery was busier than ever. It felt like the bustling energy of the shop mirrored the new pace of my life. I had finally begun to accept that I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The windows were adorned with festive decorations, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filling the air. I had always loved the holiday season, the warmth it brought in the midst of cold winter nights. But this year felt different. This year I was no longer burdened by the weight of Julian's betrayal. The holidays were mine to enjoy, mine to savor. The joy of giving back to my community, the delight of seeing the smiling faces of loyal customers, and the simple pleasure of working with my hands again, all of it felt like a small victory, a triumph of resilience. And yet, as the bakery flourished, I was reminded that success wasn't just measured in the number of pastries we sold or the accounts we gained. It was measured in how I felt about myself, how I had rebuilt my life from the ashes of my past. Daniel was by my side every step of the way. Though he had grown into a young man with his own life, he had never once hesitated to help me with the bakery. He spent countless hours organizing orders, meeting with suppliers, and even staying late to help me clean up. His support was unwavering, and I found comfort in knowing that no matter what had happened with Julian, I still had my son, my constant. One afternoon, while I was kneading dough in the back, I caught a glimpse of Daniel through the kitchen window. He was outside, talking to a customer who had just left. His face lit up with a genuine smile, and I couldn't help but watch him for a moment. He was becoming his own person, someone who had taken the lessons of strength and resilience that I had taught him and made them his own. As I watched him interact with the world around him, I felt a profound sense of pride. Despite everything, he had found his way, and I realized in that moment that I had to. As the holiday season grew closer, the demand for our pastries skyrocketed. The Grand Hotel wasn't the only client requesting large orders. Our regular customers were placing their usual pre-order requests, and we had new clients reaching out for corporate events. It was overwhelming, but it was also a reminder of just how far I had come. My bakery was thriving, and the feeling of accomplishment was more satisfying than I had ever imagined. It was one afternoon in early December when I received an unexpected call. It was from an old friend, a businesswoman named Elaine who had once worked with me when I first started the bakery. She had always been a supporter of my business, and we had kept in touch over the years. "Juliet, it's been too long." Elaine's voice was warm, with the kind of energy that immediately made me feel at ease. "I've been hearing all about your bakery. It's doing so well." I smiled as I wiped my hands on my apron. "Thank you, Elaine. It's been a journey, but I'm getting there. I'm actually calling because I have a proposal for you," she continued. "I'm starting a new venture, something that I think could really benefit both of us. I'd love to discuss a potential partnership." I was intrigued but cautious. I had learned not to rush into things without careful consideration, especially after everything that had happened with Julian. "A partnership, you say? What kind of venture?" Elaine's voice lowered slightly, as if sharing a secret. "I've been working on expanding a network of local businesses, restaurants, caterers, bakers into a community-driven food hub. I want to showcase the best our town has to offer in one place, and I think your bakery would be the perfect fit. Imagine this, a space where local businesses collaborate, share ideas, and create something greater than the sum of their parts." I leaned back against the counter, my mind racing. A collaboration, a chance to grow, to build something even more impactful than I had before. It felt like the next logical step, and yet the idea was still daunting. "It sounds exciting, Elaine," I said, my voice thoughtful. "But I need to think it over. I've worked hard to build this place into what it is today, and I can't just risk it on a whim." Elaine's response was understanding but persistent. "I completely understand, Juliet. No rush, but think about it. You've got the product, the following, and the reputation. This could open up so many doors for you." I promised to give it some thought, and after hanging up, I found myself pacing the bakery, the weight of the decision settling over me. A partnership. It could be the opportunity of a lifetime. But was I ready to take that next step? To trust again after everything that had happened? For the next few days, I couldn't shake the thought. Every time I passed a display case filled with freshly baked croissants or eclairs, the idea of expanding the bakery's reach began to feel more and more right. I had spent so much of my life focused on the past, on what I had lost, that I had forgotten to look ahead to see the possibilities that lay in front of me. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of me, I made my decision. I would take the leap. The bakery had become more than just a business. It was a reflection of who I was, of everything I had fought for, and if this partnership could help it grow even further, then it was time to trust myself and the future I was building. The next day, I called Elaine back and accepted her proposal. I was ready for the next chapter. The months that followed were filled with planning, organizing, and, above all, hope. The partnership with Elaine turned out to be everything I had hoped for and more. We worked together to create a space that not only showcased our local businesses, but also brought the community closer together. The food hub became a vibrant meeting place, a symbol of everything I had fought for: the ability to thrive, to grow, and to rebuild. As the first anniversary of Julian's departure approached, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The pain was still there, of course. It would never truly go away. But it was no longer a shadow that followed me. It was a lesson, a reminder of my strength, my resilience, and my ability to rise from the ashes. I had done it. I had built something that was truly mine. And I had reclaimed my life, one evening. As the bakery closed and the last customers drifted out into the night, I stood in front of the window, looking out at the street. The lights of the food hub glowed softly in the distance, a beacon of what I had achieved. I smiled to myself. This was just the beginning. Years later, as the bakery became a cornerstone of the community, I realized something profound. The strength I had found in myself wasn't just about surviving. It was about the legacy I left behind, not just in the pastries I baked, but in the way I lived my life. It was about showing others that no matter how deep the pain, no matter how dark the past, there is always light on the other side. And so, I continue to bake, to build, and to live not for the past, but for the future.